So fantastic. All right. So, but that's not why y'all are here to hear about what we are going to be doing down the road. You're here to enjoy this beautiful spring day. I was telling one of the other volunteers who were heading out to work that a tour about winter color is so much more effective when it's cold and dreary out. When it's mid-April weather, you're expecting a spring color out there, which we won't quite have. As some of you may have heard, I had some computer problems, so there is no handout. And I decided, since there is no handout, we are going to completely kind of freestyle it, which I'm glad I did, because this is a big group and that limits where we can get in the Arboretum and talk about plants effectively. So we staying in places where a group of us can gather and hear about the plants. But since it's completely going to be freestyle, as we go, if there is something you see that you have a question about, stop me and we'll talk about it, because I like doing that. I like doing that more than I like preparing for the event. I like just talking about it. There's so many great plants out here. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. Talk about foliage color, stem color, fruits, flowers, of course. A little of everything with this talk. So it's kind of anything goes, because I love the winter garden, especially here in the South. I always laugh at people in Chicago and places like that. Or the Northeast, where the winter garden is white for 2 feet deep right now, and look at what we have. It's kind of nice. So we'll go ahead and jump right into it. If anybody has any questions as we go, like I said, feel free to stop me and just yell Mark if you're way back. Since this is a big group, I will try and wait till everybody catches up. But if you're straggled way back behind the whole rest of the group, you may miss out on the first part of what I have to say. All right, so we're going to go ahead and head on up this way. First plant is a holly, and this is one of those things that even if you live up farther north, a lot of times you can enjoy. This is one called that's sold as Christmas Jewel. If you want the actual cultivar name, it's HL10-90. It was one that was bred by Bobhead down in South Carolina and really bred for the Southeast. It's nice. There's a lot of breeders working in the Southeast and lower mid-Atlantic that are really doing plants that are great for us, not just ones that'll grow farther north. What's nice about this holly is, one, it is self-fruitful. So if you have just the one holly, you'll get pretty good fruit. Now, if you have more hollies around, whether it's in a garden, lots of hollies like we have, or even if you're out kind of you have a natural area and you have some Ilex opaca growing out in the woods, Christmas Jewel, in my experience, is pretty promiscuous. It'll cross with quite a few things, and so you get a really heavy berry set on it, which is nice. I'm not sure the exact parentage of it, but I think it's got some attenuata blood in there. But what's really nice is it stays low. It's an upright tree. It'll get you a nice pyramidal shape. Over time, it can get 15 feet tall probably, but it's not like some of the old hybrids that grow 35, 40 feet tall and really just overgrow the space. Very easy to keep in bounds. You can keep it pruned back. You can get it into you can shear it into a tight pyramidal shape if you like, into cones and boxes and balls and all kinds of things if you really want. But just with natural growth, it does pretty well. Puts on pretty good growth for something that stays so reasonably sized. Doesn't get too big. And it is a spiny holly. Those who come on a lot of the tours know I really like the non-spiny hollies. From my days as a gardener, pruning lots and lots of hollies, holly hedges, and things like that. But this one's not too terribly bad. It'll draw blood if you really grab it too hard, but it's not too bad.
Show us.
I've got myself pretty good a couple times already.
Just kidding.
But that narrow leaf, dark glossy foliage, really nice red, deep red berries really make this just an outstanding plant. My wife always likes to do, cut holly branches at Christmas time, that kind of thing, winter time. This, we used to have a Christmas Jewel at our old house, and she really liked it because it, since the leaves are smaller, it's easier to kind of tuck in around things and decorate with than some of the larger leafed Ilex opacas that have the nice fruit.
Does it need to be pruned regularly to get that many blossoms?
No, this has never been pruned. Yeah. Odds are here in the Arboretum it hadn't been pruned. No, it was bred really specifically for the size, the leaf characteristics, and then the heavy fruit set.
Best in full sun?
Best in full sun. It'll grow just fine in shade. It'll be a little more open. It'll have a fair amount fewer flowering, so consequently fewer fruits on there, less flowering, with fewer fruits. So in full sun, with adequate moisture, that's where it's really going to do its best, but it'll grow in shade.
Are leaves darker green on top and on the bottom, or is that just the angle on both of
Yeah, that might just be the angle. I can't tell. I got the sun kind of coming in. You're going to get the deepest green typically in a shadier spot, but again, it'll open it up a little bit, and you'll have less fruit. But some of that is probably what you're seeing with the darker is you get more vigorous growth on the top, so that's a newer growth, and down bottom you have less growth. Since it's a pyramidal plant, you have less growth, and so you have older leaves kind of backing that up, so you get a little bit more of that kind of maybe off color a little bit. I'm sorry?
How cold hardy is it?
How cold hardy is it? You know, I don't know. Based on the parentage, I would say it's probably zone 6 at least. You know, if you get it up into zone 6, colder, and it may be much hardier than zone 6 even, but when you get it, the colder you get it, the more cold winds it's exposed to, the more issues you're going to have during the winter. Down south, you can use it as a windbreak. In the north, you probably wouldn't want to do that. You'd want to give it a little more protection. Other questions or thoughts?
Are you going to talk about this beauty berry over here?
Yeah,
I can, sure.
please.
Okay. Everybody turns around and looks the other way. Actually, not a beauty berry. This is a Symphoricarpus or coral berry. This one is, I never can keep them, pink magic. There are a bunch of them out there. Symphoricarpus are really easy plants. There was a question about hardiness on this. The Symphoricarpus are very hardy. They'll grow up into zone 5, maybe colder. Who cares? People can't live colder than zone 5, I don't think. That's just cruel and unusual to live in a place like that. The coral berries, there are quite a few different ones. They range from white fruited to pale pink to really nice deep pink to violet to almost red. Tend to make low arching shrubs, cascade over. Flowers aren't a whole lot to notice, but then the fruits are pretty spectacular on them, and they last for quite a long time. They are suckering shrubs, so they kind of pop up and will move around a little bit. We clean them up pretty regularly. Often have them at plant sales because they do sucker, and when we clean them up, we'll pot up the suckers. Makes them really nice for stabilizing banks and things like that. You can really, they'll kind of spread out and take over. Love sun. During the summer, they can be a little unobtrusive. They're nice. They've got a small leaf. They don't, but they don't wow you when you go through. But when they fruit, they are absolutely spectacular, and the fruits last for a long time. This is about the end of them. You can see they're turning brown. Most of them are off color, but for the bulk of the season, they are just really vivid color, and they're absolutely easy to grow.
So they're not a wildlife fruit necessarily.
Birds will eat Symphoricarpus fruits. We tend to have so many fruiting plants that they'll hit other things first. The beauty berries that were mentioned, they'll hit American beauty berries, then the Japanese ones, then a lot of the hollies, some more than others. Seems like they get the Christmas jewel less than some others. They will hit this eventually, but it's kind of low on their list.
When and how to prune?
When and how to prune? Good question. This is one of those plants where the flowers and fruit are on the new growth, so you could, once these fruits really start to go over this time of year, a little bit later, coming in before spring starts going, you could take them all the way back to the ground if you want. You could also come through and just take out the oldest stalks on there, ones that are going vertical. And if you look in here, you can see some old cuts where they had gotten kind of tall and leggy, and we just cut those tall shoots back. You could leave it and never prune it at all and just let it go, and just let it become kind of a big spreading mass if that was what you needed for the area. So you can do either selective pruning or just really hard, take it back to the ground.
If you take it to the ground, how much growth can you anticipate?
It'll look about like this the next year. Yeah, I mean that summer it'll flush out pretty quickly and you know, 2-3 feet tall in a season.
When we're
Once
given
it's established.
Right.
when we're given cuttings of this for the wreath workshop, they're very popular. They work
Yeah.
out very well in the wreaths. And I don't think the berries fall off from what I've seen.
Yeah, the berries are held on very, very tightly. So yeah, they're good for cut flowers. I don't always think about those kind of things. I have plants outside. My dogs eat them if I bring them inside. So, but yeah, they're very good for wreaths and those kind of decorations. Other questions? Really nice plant. You don't see this in the south so much because they can grow it in the north. So you know, if you're in the south, you've got other things you can do. But yeah, it's a very good plant. Just not widely grown. That is a sweet gum. That's small. That's I can't remember if that's gumball or a coney. I think gumball, and it's just a little dwarf rounded thing. Not much during winter. Is there?
Good winter color here too.
Good winter color. You want me to talk about this one?
Yeah.
All right. This may be the shortest chairs walking forever. A lot of our volunteers just had a soup, salad lunch with tables and tables full of dessert. So if the volunteers are asking a lot of questions, it may be because they don't want to move. This is an abelia, glossy abelia, Abelia grandiflora, which are really just workhorse type plants for us. The glossy abelia is just the straight Abelia grandiflora, big shrub, really easy to grow. This is a form called Radiance that was bred, that was found and introduced right here in North Carolina by Panoramic Farms, which are out in the western end of the state. It's got a kind of a one that I'm sorry, it's Kaleidoscope. Did I say Radiance? They just released a new one called Radiance. Kaleidoscope.
I was looking for a tag for you, Mark.
Which is a better name for this because it does change color all through the season. When it emerges, it has a little bit of this pinkish red to it, really bright gold and the green in the center. And during the middle of the summer, it's really almost more gold than anything else, and with a little bit of green. And then as you go into winter, if it were actually cold much, you get a lot more of this red to it. So it really kind of shifts and changes color all season long. Radiance stays pretty low and mounded, only to about 3 feet tall. It can send up some tall shoots from the center. Sometimes you just cut those out because they kind of detract from the rest of the look. Flowers during the summer are kind of pinkish white, held by these rosy calyces, or little, the little cups that hold the flowers. When the flowers fall, the calyces, those rosy calyces, still look nice up against the rest of the foliage, and so you get a really long, effective season of bloom because of those calyces. So it looks like something's in flower over several months over the summer. The flowers are extremely attractive to bees and other pollinators. We're always trying to bring in plants that'll bring the bees because there aren't enough of those things out there, and we're busy killing and spraying off all the ones that there are. So these are great plants to have in a garden to bring bees in. If you're if you're a vegetable gardener and you want bees in there in your vegetable gardens or for fruit, these will really help draw them in. So great in that respect.
How long will it take a little one to get big?
How long will it take a little one to get big? Abelias are very vigorous growers for the most part. There are a couple that are pretty weak, but Kaleidoscope, despite the fact that it seems to have so little green in there, is really a very vigorous plant. And from like say a 1 gallon plant, you can expect 2 feet by 2 feet within a couple of years easily. Depending on soil and water and that kind of thing. But with average care, yeah, I mean they'll grow pretty vigorously, and then they'll kind of spread out a little bit and get wider once they get up to about 3 feet tall.
Full sun.
Thank you. Full sun you'll get the best color. Abelias will tolerate a fair amount of shade. They're going to be a little bit looser, a little more open, a little bit taller. They'll tend to send more shoots up and be a little more arching and open. But they'll grow in full sun. I mean, in fairly good shade. Okay, next plant is the magnolia. This is Magnolia ex Lebneri Merrill. This is one of the very early plants in the Arboretum as the Arboretum, and as far as I can tell from my records, this is the first magnolia that was planted on the grounds as the Arboretum. Makes a pretty good sized tree. Now this is an old one. Typically, if people ask me what size Merrill gets, I say 20 feet or so tall. This is probably getting a little bit above that, but still, that's on average. One of the earliest of the deciduous magnolias to flower for us. It's an old standby. It's been grown for years and years. It's still in the trade. There are a lot of these plants that they're out there and they disappear and other things come back in. This is one that's still in the trade because it's so good. One of the nice things about Merrill is, as an early bloomer, it doesn't open all of its flowers at once. There are some magnolias that really, man, they are just stupendous. All the flowers open at one time, and then they get hit by frost and they all disappear. This is one that's especially good for us because we can get those temperatures down in the 20s. Some of those flowers will turn brown, but then there are other buds usually that haven't even started to open that are protected, and so you get more color. If you have a winter where you don't have a lot of those cold temperatures, it'll keep flowering from usually about mid-February for 3 weeks or so, 3 or 4 weeks. This one got started a little bit early because of the warm weather. After it leaves out, it's nice. Some of the magnolias have great big huge leaves, which can be a little bit coarse in the garden. This has relatively small leaves on it. Got that beautiful white bark, and it's been a really good grower in a lot of situations. I've seen it used as a street tree in a residential area. Really a nice plant.
Do the blossoms have any fragrance?
Do the blossoms have any fragrance? Yes. Y'all can pass it around. See it up close. Other questions?
What's the shrub behind the tree? Is that an Elysium?
That is an Elysium. Yeah.
Which one?
I'm not sure right off the top of my head. I think it is probably an anisatum, it looks like, but I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, it's the white flowered, it's the white form of Floridanum, semis. Another little flower for those of you, if you want to get up close and see them, around this corner there's a crocus flowering. This is one that's a Crocus chrysanthus ardschenk, which is one of my very favorite of the crocuses. Every time I've grown this, it really tends to get these it offsets well, and you get these masses within just a couple years of planting them of just a lot of color right there. A lot of the other Crocus chrysanthus stay kind of thin when they flower, but this, you really get that patch of flowers, which is so nice in the garden. I really think that's effective. And you can dig those up and separate them out and get a bunch more, but you can see right in here. Crocus are one of the easier of the small bulbs. People probably heard me say this. You say minor bulbs, and Brent Heath from Brent and Becky's Bulbs gets very upset when you say minor bulbs. There are no minor bulbs. Some are just smaller than others and not as widely grown. But the crocus, this ardschenk is a very early one. Foliage the petals tend to be sturdy enough to stand up to our winter rains that we often get and still look good. nice foliage, and then when the flowers fade, since they're growing in that tight clump, it's just like a little tight clump of foliage until they go dormant. It's almost like a little fescue or something, a little clumping fescue.
Could you spell Ardshank?
ARDSCHENK. Maybe CK. No C.
Is that one of the ones that is less palatable for squirrels?
I don't know. Question was if it's one of the ones that's less palatable to squirrels. I don't know about that. I do know that squirrels, if squirrels see you planting things, they will often come back and dig them up just to see, you know, what acorns you're planting, you're storing. And so even if they're not palatable, if they watch you dig them up, watch you plant them, they'll often dig them up and then just leave them.
In Denny's class, he said the Tommies,
Thomasinianus?
yeah, are less prone to wildlife attacking them.
Okay, yeah, Crocus Thomasinianus, less prone.
Dig 3 to 5 holes and plant one.
There you go.
You got a chance.
Put some acorns in the other ones.
Yeah.
With squirrel poison.
I have also used crocus, and including this one in lawns quite a bit. At other gardens, run a aerator through and then just drop the bulbs in. If you're really good, then you put something on top of them, but you really don't have to. You get about, 60% of them or so will come up even if you don't fill them in on top. I have found though, as much as I like this one, you're really best with purple ones, because if you do yellow ones, they look like early dandelions. If you do white ones, it looks like trash. So.
Can I ask you a question about color of the crocus? It seems to me all my crocuses are various colors. Yellow always comes up earliest and first.
Question was yellow. The comment was yellow. Your yellow crocus always seems to come up earliest and first. Well, many of the yellows are chrysanthus types. They are the same species. So this species is an early flowering one. But a lot of the purple ones come up just as early as the yellow ones.
Yellow always up first every year.
Well, if you're not adding more, if what you have, your earliest ones are always going to be earliest. So if your yellow ones are your earliest ones that you have out there, they're always going to be the earliest. But there are other ones that are early. Some of the purples are very, very early, starting in December. Just depends on which varieties. Is that right? Well, they're going earlier than that. You almost have
Fall crocus.
comes. Oh yeah, middle of January. So yeah, I mean we've had a lot. It just depends on the variety. There are dozens and dozens of different ones out there. So I don't know which ones you have, but you could get purple ones or white ones that are earlier if you just do some searching in the bulb catalogs and that kind of thing.
I don't know which way we're going, but is that a variegated leaf plant that's about 11 feet tall there?
Yeah, that's a variegated ligustrum.
Oh.
Wax leaf privet. Okay, witch hazel is another group, kind of classic winter plants. All kinds of different. There are several species, I should say. We have some native ones: Hamamelis virginiana, Hamamelis vernalis, and then there's some Asian ones: Hamamelis chinensis and japonica. But the bulk of the really good garden witch hazels are the hybrids, Hamamelis ex intermedia. This is one called Dorak. I don't know what that means. It's from Europe. And if anybody can translate Dorak, please do. This is one I especially like just because the color is so intense. A lot of the yellows are either more orangey gold, or they're more kind of a lighter yellow, but this is like this school bus yellow is kind of an unusual color for it, which I think is especially nice. The witch hazels will tolerate a lot of cold. These little strappy petals, when it gets too cold, they'll kind of curl up and then roll back out, so they don't take damage in the cold. I can't imagine us having a spell that was so cold that would damage the flowers here in Raleigh. I mean, it would have to be kind of 100-year type cold snap. The one downside to witch hazels when they're in flower is their leaves hang on the plant in a lot of cases, a lot of breeding's being done to get witch hazels that will shed their leaves, but a lot of them still hold their leaves. Really, it's most effective to go through and take them off, but you have to be careful because they really hang on, and if you just yank them off, it'll often strip bark on there. You don't want to do that. The piece that's being passed around, is it fragrant at all? Yes. Okay. I can't smell witch hazels ever, so I never know if they're fragrant. But some are more fragrant than others. Most are at least somewhat fragrant. If you come through and cut off all the leaves, they look even better. A lot of people like using them for cut stems. You can force them inside. Most of these things that flower very early in the winter, you can cut and bring inside, and they'll force really nicely and come out and flower indoors for you. Get the fragrance inside, or you can just enjoy them out in the garden.
How big will they get?
Depends on the witch hazel. In general, the intermediate types will grow to about 6 to maybe 12 feet tall for the larger growing ones. They can often grow quite a bit wider if you let them. They'll often grow out. There are some dwarf ones. This one's called Quasimodo. There's also another one called Little Susie that are really short plants, and you can see all the little internodes between the buds, how short those all are on that as opposed to this. So it kind of is, it varies, and most good sources will list kind of a ballpark height. Dorac's kind of an intermediate one, more around that 8-foot size.
I've been looking to buy a witch hazel, but the nurseries around here don't seem to have it.
Not a ton of them around here. You can find a lot more of them mail order. Not sure if Brightest's does just mail order, does just wholesale or not, but Brightest's nursery is a very good place. Tim Brightestman is one of the experts on witch hazel in the U.S. Really, they're growing, I don't know how many, 30, 40. I'm sorry? Meadowbrook has some, there you go. Camellia Forest usually has some. Just you have to look around. Most often, they are grafted. They don't have to be grafted, but they are usually grafted. You can see on some of these, you can see on here for sure where it's grafted. So you have to be careful if you get shoots coming out from below. You've got to cut those off. Those are going to be just a small flowered orange one, almost invariably. They're just a seedling. And you be careful because you'll see a large plant and all of a sudden you say, wow, look, they got 2 different colors on there. One of it's rootstock, and a rootstock is generally going to be more vigorous. So you do want to cut that out. Unless you don't care, you can have nice flower. And I know a lot of times they're grafted on Hamamelis vernalis, which will flower a slightly different time than most of the intermediates, so you can get longer flowering period. Yeah, we're going to go around there. Okay. We're going to hit it.
Mark, what determines whether or not witch hazels retain their leaves or not? Is there any consistency?
I don't know. I have no idea about the genetics about how they keep their leaves. There's in a lot of them there's a lack of production of abscisic acid when the leaves are dropping, but I don't know why.
Amethyst over there holds its leaves.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Right, which is it's a gorgeous one. That's the other one that I'm going to show everybody is the amethyst. It's kind of hard to get in around where it is, but it's worth looking at because it's complete departure in flower color from the typical witch hazels. But yeah. Now, if you have a lot of people, in Atlanta when I was a gardener, we had a lot more people, and my boss said, get out with scissors and cut off all the leaves on the witch hazels. I took care of the woodland collection, and I laughed and thought she was joking. She was not joking, and we snipped them all off. And they looked really good when we did that, so.
Frustrating.
Okay,
Not anymore.
This is one that there's been some confusion about. This is one that JC introduced. If I'm correct, and please correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, Vivian. This was found on campus near Kilgore Hall. Looking at our unofficial historian here. Get this right. And it was selected because it flowered early and it was more heat tolerant than a lot of the other cornelian dogwoods or cornelian cherries. Cornus moss and Cornus officinalis being the two main ones. It's a lovely small tree, almost invariably multi-stemmed, although I have seen single-stemmed specimens, which are nice, although I think the multi-stemmed is a little bit better. This one is Spring Glow, so that's what JC named it. You can almost call it Winter Glow because it really flowers during the winter. Really good flowers, nice foliage, beautiful bark on it, really just a standout plant. It's been one of the ones that's held up as a garden plant, a release that's held up as garden plant more than just about any other selection from the Arboretum over time. It's one that still gets hardcore plant people excited that you see it in a lot of their gardens. There's been some name confusion on it. When it was originally introduced, originally named, it was Cornus officinalis Spring Glow. At some point, JC changed it to Cornus Moss Spring Glow. Looking at it with some other dogwood aficionados and such, we've put it back as Cornus officinalis, which is where I think it belongs. When you look at the veining on the leaves, the tufts of hairs in the leaves, the flower time, the heat tolerance, just a whole lot of characteristics, it seems to be more Cornus officinalis. I should also mention, I called it a Cornelian cherry, and it's called that because it gets a little bright red cherry-like fruits. Spring Glow, in my experience, does not fruit very heavily. Some fruit more heavily than others. Spring Glow has not been one that's fruited very heavily for me, although other people may have other experiences with it that I'd love to hear. Questions, comments, thoughts? Yeah, the bark is incredible. This is one of my favorite trees for bark. And it's just, this plant is a flower machine compared to other Cornus officinalis. It just, you can see it's even flowering down low on the trunk in some spots. Great plant. And for those of you, people always ask about sun and shade, this will grow in quite a bit of shade. All right, another magnolia. I'm getting y'all excited for this Magnolia Mayhem program we've got going on. We have really been doing a lot of collecting on the evergreen magnolias. We get very excited about them. You get foliage year round, and then wonderful flowers, often in winter. This is one called Magnolia Maudier. It's one of the ones that's really done particularly well for us, and it flowers right in the dead of winter every year, and it keeps putting out flowers, kind of like I talked about with Merrill. It keeps putting out flowers, so you can see that there are flowers that are faded and passed. There's some that are shattered on there. Just on this one branch, you can see there's three spots where there were flowers previously. Got another one that's opened up, and one that's still pretty tight in there. Got buds that haven't even opened yet that still have their that are still tight. So it lasts over a long period. It is a little more susceptible to cold than, say, Merrill. When it gets down near freezing, you get some browning on these petals like this. But it's still, to me, it's worth it. You still get overall a really impressive show on a nice upright evergreen tree. You can pass these around. So great winter flowers. Foliage is really nice, thick textured. The Maudier forms we grow have been very, very hardy. We haven't seen much in the way of foliage damage during the winters at all. Really deep green with a kind of a bluish back to the bluish silvery back to the petals, which is nice because it is an upright plant. You can often, when the breeze blows, see the undersides of that plant. And the other nice thing, especially for us, where you can see we take up every bit of space we can, it is a fairly narrow plant, at least when it's young, so you can pack in a lot of other things around it.
How much shade does it tolerate?
How much shade does it tolerate? It's an understory tree in the wild. It'll tolerate quite a bit of shade. Again, it'll stretch a little bit. You'll get the flowers up towards the top. You won't get so many down the sides like we do here. But especially under deciduous shade, does very well where it's getting more light during the winter, because it's one that'll stay fairly active during the winter. So if it can do that, it'll photosynthesize and kind of store some of those sugars.
How do you spell the species name?
Maudier, M-A-U-D-I-A-E. Is that right? Biff's nodding for me.
Looks okay.
I can write it. It's spelling it out loud that's hard for me.
Now, is that typical, the browning, because of the cold we've had recently? Or?
Yes. Yeah. That's pretty typical. There's rarely a winter that goes by that you don't get some damage to some of the flowers. And it could be, you'll get them out and we'll get a cold spell and they'll all go really brown and then come back out.
But it doesn't kill the tree.
Doesn't hurt the tree. No. If we had a really very cold winter, like some of the ones during the mid 80s, 86, yeah, that could really knock it back pretty hard. But other than that, it's good plant for us.
Holly tree.
Yes.
That's not
Yes. But on the plus side with Nellie Stevens, or most any holly, evergreen hollies like this, you can cut it back hard. You can cut it back to the ground. You can cut it back to 4 feet, and it'll resprout from there. So you'll be seeing on the mixed border on the other side. We've got tall Nellie Stevens. We're going to be cutting them all back this winter, so you can watch that yourself.
Tropical.
Yeah, it's very tropical looking. Fermiana simplex. It's a very quick growing tree. Huge leaves. You can see these are the leaves from Fermiana simplex here on the ground. And a young plant, they're even larger. And then it will get big, huge. It gets big clusters of kind of greenish white flowers. They're not so showy that it'll make you look up, but if you look up and notice it in flowers, pretty impressive. And then big clusters of these kind of Chinese paper lantern type seed pods, really pretty showy as a plant. It's also the bark it's got this very smooth bark, very coarse branching, really a neat textural tree, and it is fast, and it will seed around in here. Sometimes we have. We do often seedlings. It will seed around itself. Birds don't eat the fruit, so you don't get them transported long distances. So not a problem that way. But you can also, as young plants, you can let them grow up and then cut them back and let them grow again. And, cut them back each year. It won't flower or fruit, but the leaves will be huge every year, kind of like you could do with a catalpa, cutting it back. Really impressive. You don't get that wonderful bark though when you do that.
Common name?
Parasol tree, Chinese parasol tree.
There's that big root coming out from it.
Yeah, they don't always do big buttress roots like that. Not sure why this one did that, but they'll sometimes, you'll often get a really broad flare on there, not typically 5 feet long. All right, such a nice day. After the tour, I encourage everybody to come back and kind of explore the winter garden a little bit more. But with this large group, it's kind of hard to talk about a whole lot in there. But there's a lot going on. There were hellebores, several different species of hellebores, lots of hybrids. There's the winter flowering iris, which is flowering now. There's the cyclamen that are flowering. There's mahonias. There's some prunus and other wonderful things that aren't in flower but have great shape and color. Back there you see the Edgeworthia, which I'm not going to talk about that this time because I feel like I've talked about it a lot on tours, more mahonias. But this plant is another one which is seems to be more widely grown a little farther north, mainly because it's the only jasmine they can grow in colder climates. This is Jasminum nudiflorum, which makes a low spreading shrub, again kind of suckering like that Symphora carpus. I've seen this planted at the edge of walls that were, the walls were easily 12 or 15 feet tall, and the branches on this were almost down to the ground. It'll really just keep cascading down, given room. In a garden, it'll often root in at the tips, and I don't know if these have, yeah, that's rooted right there. So it'll often layer itself and kind of creep along that way. It's a great plant, especially for bank size, because it'll do that. It'll hold on the bank very well. You get these great yellow flowers in the winter. Despite being a jasmine, it's not, I don't think it's fragrant at all. So that's the one negative on there. The newest growth, which is where you're getting the flowering, is green, which is kind of nice, kind of a showy thing. And really, if you want to get in there and do a lot of work, you can get in there and take out some of the oldest things and rejuvenate it and keep it young that way. Typically, you just let it grow like a haystack instead of trying to get in there, because that can be a pain. But it always seems to want to go in one direction. So if you put it in the hill, it'll kind of come down. But even here, it kind of seems to want to go this way.
Go west, young man.
Go west, young man. There you go. Maybe it is always west.
I think, are you going to talk about that plant? Because I think I have it and it smells so good.
It's the Edgeworthia. I can't. If everybody, if consensus is for me to talk about, I can talk about Edgeworthia if you want. I love Edgeworthia. Yeah. I feel like I talk about it all the time on these tours.
Small.
But no, there are a lot of new faces on the tours, so we'll talk about it.
Thank you.
Edgeworthia is in the Daphne family. It's Timolaceae family. Really one of the outstanding garden plants, and it's one that's really catching on. 20 years ago, if you saw it in somebody's garden, man, you knew that they were a real plants person, because it just wasn't around, and nobody could figure out why, because it's such a great plant. It propagates relatively easily, it grows quickly, and it looks good in a pot. Just all kinds of reasons why it should be more widely grown. It's picking up acceptance. I was just at my wife's work at Duke Raleigh Hospital, and they've got a bunch of them planted out there, and everywhere I go, I tend to see them more and more. So they're really becoming more of a mainstream plant, which is great, because it is a fantastic plant. It's like I said, it's in the thyme family. It's in the Daphne family, and when it's in leaf, it looks like some Daphnes. It has long, kind of thin, light, pale green leaves that are quite nice. You can get some insect problems on the leaves. You get some mites and things like that if it doesn't have good air circulation. It'll grow in sun or shade. Seems to do pretty well either way. Seems to flower well either way. And then in the fall, it'll form these little white button buds that hang down off each branch. And then as you get into the winter, they start opening up, and you get these wonderful yellow flowers inside.
Are they fragrant?
They're very
Oh,
fragrant. That's what you're smelling right now is a combination of the Mahonia and the Edgeworthia, but mainly the Edgeworthia here.
Can you talk about pruning Edgeworthia?
Sure. Yeah. One of the nice things about Edgeworthia is it tends to keep a really nice shape, because every time it branches in threes, and so it always keeps that really nice shape. You'd be hard pressed to find too many spots where it doesn't branch into threes. You probably find a few, but not many. So it tends to overall keep this really nice rounded shape. And here we have two plants here. So get that really nice shape. It'll often sucker from the interior. You'll get these shoots up from the interior. You can cut those out and clear them out. Other than that, wouldn't do a whole lot of pruning on it.
How large does it get?
Well, I've seen some that are as big as, say, 8 feet by 8 feet. There's a form that Tony Avon selected called Snow Cream that tends to be a very vigorous, very large form.
How big will this one get?
Well,
You don't know.
it'll keep growing. Plants don't. You see in books an ultimate height on plant. That doesn't really exist. Plants keep growing as long as they're alive. So ultimately, this plant could get 8 feet tall. I'm not sure how long it's been here, but it's been here for a pretty good while. And as it gets older and there are more branches to split off into threes, less energy can go off each direction. So whereas at some points you get really vigorous growth like this, as it gets older, you tend to start getting less and less of that. So it kind of diminishing returns. So it'll keep growing, but each year it'll get a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less. But so maybe 6 or 8 feet tall. It's already approaching that in width. And this is a pretty big old plant. Now you can, if you want to, and I don't know why you would, but you could, if you wanted to, come in and cut this back, cut some of these older stems back and cut them out and leave some of these suckers coming up. And next year, those little straight shoots in the middle will branch into threes, and they will start forming that nice shape. I don't know why you would do that, but you could.
What's the species?
Pardon?
Moist, dry?
You want to be more on the dry side than the wet side. Yeah. You
Can
can
it take full shade or just light shade?
They'll take pretty full shade. Yeah.
What's the species on this again?
Edgeworthia chrysantha is what I would call this. There is taxonomic debate about how many species, whether there are 3 species or 1 species. The 2 names you see most often, Edgeworthia chrysantha and Edgeworthia papyrifera, tend to distinguish, at least horticulturally, if not botanically, differentiate this kind of more robust form, stouter stems, larger leaves, larger flowers as Edgeworthia chrysantha, and then the smaller one, this one you can see behind that has smaller flowers, thinner stems, is right back here. You kind of have to look through this one to see it, and it's very similar. Edgeworthia papyrifera.
Nursery's probably going more on paper bush.
Japanese paper bush, it's often called, and the bark is used to make a really, really fine quality, the kind of the inside of the bark, real fine quality paper in Japan. You can still get paper made from that in Japan, but it's very expensive. Other questions or thoughts? It's a knockout plant all year round. When it just has the leaves on there, it's such a perfect shape. It's great, and then all winter, because those buds look good from fall all the way to when it starts flowering. Really just an outstanding plant. One of the first plants I planted at every house I've owned. There are a lot of hollies from China, but this is the one that is called Chinese holly. Ilex cornuta. Cornuta means horn, and as a young plant, Ilex cornuta has almost square leaves, very thick textured, almost square leaves with these points coming out on the sides. Some of the most popular landscape plants are Ilex cornuta, burfordi, needlepoint, carissa, some of those. Pardon?
They are vicious.
They are vicious spines on there, in no small part because the leaves are, like leather. So very tough. This is one of several yellow-berried forms of the Chinese holly. This is one called d'or, as in gold, I guess, French gold. That very exceptionally large fruits on this form. Really, these are almost half an inch, and gold, heavy fruiting one. Now, this is in some measure heavy fruiting because we have lots and lots of hollies out here. So that helps it get pollinated. But even in a typical landscape, it'll fruit pretty heavily. And if you get a male Ilex cornuta, it'll definitely fruit very heavily. Grows into a large plant. Ultimately, can make a pretty good sized tree if you let it. If you don't prune it. We're at the point now where we're probably going to start pruning it up a little bit and turning it into a tree. You could also prune it back hard. Again, hollies you can prune back hard. Nice glossy green, probably not going to be on the top of the list for deer if you have deer. That very newest growth they'll nibble on. I've had a research project with a bunch of hollies planted in deer country, and they would eat the newest growth, but then later on in the season when more things were up, they would go on to other things, and the holly would burst right out and not really bother it a whole lot. Very tough plants. They'll grow. Again, this is another one that'll grow in sun or shade. Don't look for a lot of fruit in heavy shade, but it'll grow there. But really, yeah, some yellow fruited plants that are typically red or orange are interesting just because they're different. But this is one that's really very, very showy in fruit.
Ultimately, how tall did you say?
Ultimately, probably can get to be 35, 45 feet tall. That would be a very old plant. In 20 years, which is kind of the typical time you talk about with them, you're probably looking at 20 feet tall. This is just one of these wonderful early flowering cherries. It's one called First Lady, Prunus First Lady, released by the National Arboretum. They had a series of these. There's a really nice breeding program with Prunus there. That's kind of on hiatus. We still have 1 or 2 unnamed ones that we keep needling them to put a name on because they're so good. But First Lady's a nice one because it's small, and a lot of people don't have a lot of room in their gardens. This is one that's really a 12 or 15 foot flowering cherry. Comes out very early, kind of in terms of the true flowering cherries. Once you get past the flowering apricots, Okame tends to be the very first one, and then First Lady is one of the very next ones to come out. And First Lady is smaller, more of a rounded head, and a little bit deeper color than Okame. I think the color is a little nicer on this one. Got pretty nice bark. Got that cherry type bark. And First Lady, what impresses me beyond its kind of size and the early flowering is it's been one of the more disease-resistant ones. Prunus in general get diseases. They always get diseases. They probably always will get diseases. This is one that I'm sure will get diseases, but doesn't seem to as readily as some of the other flowering cherries. It's been relatively long-lived. The original one's still up at the National Arboretum, and the breeding area is still looks good. You don't see a lot of those weeping cankers and things that you get with a lot of prunus. So nice plant. I probably jinxed it. It'll probably be dead by early spring. It doesn't form fruit much at all, which is good because they're not really edible. And then kind of nice flowers. It fades into the background a little bit after it finishes flowering, but there's plenty in the spring to take over for it then, so that's okay. But really a nice little plant.
So is this what's flowering along Western Avenue by Pullen and State?
No, that is probably
It comes out in the middle of winter and just blossoms.
There are a couple things around town. And I'm not sure what's over there. Somebody may be able to help me. It's probably either Prunus mume, which would be a little earlier than this. They'd be finished up by now, most of them, or Okame, the selection Okame. And if they've got kind of an upright head, more upright, that would be Prunus Okame. There are also some of the flowering plums are flowering now. Color would be a little bit lighter, but they're starting to flower as well. Anybody know what's down there, Western Poland?
I'm always surprised. Every winter I come down Western and here's this tree blooming like crazy.
What's that?
I think it's Prunus mume. It blooms so early.
Yeah, it could very well. There's a lot of Prunus mume around town.
It's very
So
different.
is that the,
energy actually is still on fire like this.
okay? So Prunus mume, which that's a large Prunus mume back here. That's an early one. But there are some that are still in full flower right now.
Shade, is this okay in shade?
No, this you really want sun. You can grow it in pretty heavy shade. You will not get a single flower on it though, so it'll defeat the purpose a bit.
The spreading shape is typical.
Yeah, this is pretty typical. Often if you go to a nursery and buy it, you'll get it as a single trunk up to 4 or 5 feet, and then a nice rounded head on top of that. This low branching would be, you wouldn't get this in many nurseries. Which is a shame. I kind of like that shape for trees.
But you can create it.
You can create it, yeah. It's a little harder if you get you want to get a smaller plant if you're going to do that. Yeah.
Let me go sit.
Okay, that is it for the tour. I do want to point out, if you go down along this path here, you don't have to go across the boardwalk, but just a little ways down, there's up against the holly hedge, there's another witch hazel called amethyst. And the color on it is just completely different than any other witch hazel out there. It's closer to this than the oranges and yellows. So take a peek at that on your way back. And enjoy the day. There's some beautiful things out here now. And beautiful day.